the very first line of 71a, Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph, at the Mishnah. The Mishnah is continuing this a little bit. We've seen most of the things in this Mishnah in the last 10 daf already. So the Mishnah is continuing listing things that when you sell something and you don't specify what you sold. So in our case, you're selling a field. So part of your field is are pits that hold water, and cisterns, and shovach is like a bird's nest, so to speak, like a little birdhouse. So Mishnah says lo es habor, velo es hagas, velo es shovach. Those things are not included when you sell a field. Bein chareven, bein yeshuvim, whether they're not occupied, they're charuv, like the churban, like destroyed, they're not occupied. Bein yeshuvim, whether they are occupied, even if they're not occupied, so they don't have their own identity, so to speak. So, sorry, they do have their own identity. They're separate from the field, and therefore, if you don't mention them, they're not included in your sada. Your sada, your field, only includes things that are vital and essential to it, and those things they hold your water, they hold your birds. It's not part of the field. Okay, so now the question became, what happens with the pathway to get to your reservoir of water? So you didn't sell the bore, you're right, you only sold your field. So now that guy has a field. You have the birdhouse, or you have the reservoir of water. What happens to the pathway to get to the birdhouse, or the pathway to get to the reservoir of water? So this
is pre-drone days.
Pre-drone days? No. What drone days? What do you mean?
Before there were drones to help you.
Oh, before there were drones, correct. There's a very good chance that this was before drone days, right? We need conclusive evidence, but
they use the doves for that.
Yeah, they use the doves for the drones. Very good. So v'tzarich likach lo derech. So famous opinion of Rabbi Akiva that the seller who sold a field but left this body of water for himself, the pathway, if he wants the pathway, he has to go and acquire it from the buyer. Because why? Because Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that when you sell something, you sell it b'ayin yafa, with a generous eye, meaning you don't retain it for yourself. That came with the property. You sold the field, you sold the path to get to the reservoir, even though you kept the reservoir for yourself. The Chacham omrim, eino tzarech. Nope. They hold really you sell the ayin ra with more of a stingy eye, and therefore you only sold the field, but the path was not included in that. The path you keep for yourself, and therefore eino tzarech, you don't have to go and reacquire the path from the buyer. Okay, so that's the first thing. Do you sell b'ayin yafa, or do you sell b'ayin ra? Umoder Rabbi Akiva agrees. So when he says that when a person says, I'm selling you a field, except for these things, so then she'eno tzarech likach derech, so that you don't have to acquire the path from somebody else. However, Rabbi Akiva agrees that when you sell a field, but you specify that I will not be selling, not that you leave it out, and now we need to figure out what you sold. You specifically specified, I'm not selling you my birdhouse or my reservoir of water. So then you do retain the path for yourself. It's only when you didn't specify that we can assume that you sold it b'ayin yafa. We assume that you sold and didn't retain things for yourself. But if you specify that I'm not selling the reservoir of water, so then if you explicitly say that, so then we assume that the pathway to get to that reservoir of water you also didn't sell. So now, machron la'acher, you go and you sell just the pit, just the reservoir of water, just the birdhouse to somebody else. Rabbi Akiva Omer, eino tzarech likach lo derech. Same thing. He says that you do not need to go and acquire. 1 second. Eino tzarech likach lo derech. The buyer does not need to acquire from the seller a path. Why? Because the path came along with the reservoir. Why? because Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that when you sell with a generous eye. If you're buying the reservoir of water or you're buying the birdhouse, the Chachamim say that the path to get there is not included in the sale. You have to specify it. And if you don't specify it, so then if you want to go now acquire this pathway in the field, which leads to your newly acquired reservoir of water, you would have to go and reacquire that. Or you have to go and buy that separately. You buy a package, it's batteries sold separately, right? You pick up the race car from the store, and you're not sure, like, if I don't have batteries, I can't use the race car. So they should really sell me the batteries too. So sometimes the package will say batteries not included. Sometimes it will include it. So in this case, they're not included. So the path is not included, and therefore you'd have to go and buy it from the seller.
You mean like buying an airplane ticket?
Like buying an airplane ticket? What do you mean?
You gotta pay for your seat, you gotta pay for your luggage, you gotta.
Correct.
Oh,
Exactly. Just like an airplane ticket. Correct. To pay for everything separately. Exactly.
just stay away from Spirit. Much better. The other airlines are better.
No, correct. Okay. So now, yeah. So B'med Dvarim Amurim, this whole idea of the Chachamim that they say you sell with a more stingy eye, the ayin ra, and unless you specify it, then you keep it to yourself. It doesn't go along with your sale. That's only b'mocher. That's when you're selling things. Aval b'nosin matana, nosin eskula. When you're giving a present to somebody, so then everyone's going to agree that those things do come along with excuse me, that those things do come along with the sale, with the gift. So when it comes to a present, even the Chachamim will agree that you will acquire the things that we just mentioned. So all these things that the mission start off with, lo es sabor, v'lo es sagas, v'lo es shovach, if you give your sadeh, your field, as a present, those things would be included. Even though when you sell it, they're not included. However, the Rashbam points out, but our sycamore trees and our carob trees, so those things are not necessarily included. Those really have their own identity. But other things would be included. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so now, brothers that the father died, and they need to now split up the fields between each other. So when you go and you split the field, so then what do you get? So I think we mentioned, I don't know, a week or two ago, that in essence, really the brothers really own each part of the whole inheritance. So when they're giving up, so let's say you have 10 fields, each brother really has a part in all the fields. So if they're splitting up the fields now, Reuben takes fields, A, B, 1, 2, and 3, and Shimon takes fields, the next 3 fields. So, D, E, and F, or whatever it is. So it's really, it's like a sale, because I'm giving up my rights to fields, D, E, and F, and you're giving up your rights to fields A, B, and C. So now, when you give up those fields, what comes along with the field? So says the Mishnah, Ha'achin shechilku. So zachu b'sadeh, zacha b'kula. If you're splitting up an inheritance, and part of the inheritance is a field, and in the field you have these bores, these pits with water, cisterns, and these birdhouses. So then, when you acquire the field, you acquire everything inside of it. So now, even though when you sell something, it's not included, when you split a field, it is included. So what's the difference? And don't say it's like giving a present. It's not. It's really more like a sale. So says the Rashbam, the reason is that basically what you're doing is when you're giving up a field when you're to your siblings, so you totally want to be removed from that field. And that's yours. I want nothing to do with it. This is mine. You stay away. That's sort of the mentality of when they're splitting it up. So that's the kavanah. That's the intent behind it. Once you get a field, it's yours. Goodbye. So you're not going to leave over, it's your field except for the following 4 things in your field. No, that's your field. This is my field. And of course, if they specify each person gets the field, but they don't get the cistern and the birdhouse inside the field, then it's a different story. But we keep talking about cases where they didn't specify. Just take your field. So taking your field in the world of inheritance is understood to mean as take the whole thing.
Completely give up the rights to the other brother's field, pathways.
Everything, right?
Everything.
Right. Yeah. What about the carob tree?
Even the, yes, even the carob.
Even the carob tree, right? Even the carob tree, yeah. Because once again, when in this case, meaning by regular sale, so you're looking very specifically, what did you sell and what did you not sell? By inheritance, it seems like the idea is you want to remove yourself completely from that property. This is one big property, one big estate. Whatever you get, I'm totally removed from it. So therefore, whatever's included in that, unless specified otherwise, will come along with that. Okay. Now, hamakzik b'nichsei ager. So nichsei ager is always our way to refer to ownerless property. It's talking about someone who converted and then died. So he doesn't have any legal relatives. So now, you want to come and acquire ownerless property. So it says higzik b'sadeh, higzik b'kulos. Now this field has pits, birdhouses, carob trees, sycamore trees. Once you've acquired the field, you've acquired everything inside the field. You don't need to make a separate kinyan, a separate acquisition on the carob trees. Even though the Rajban points out that earlier we said when you have two fields and a fence in the middle, so then if you acquire one of those fields, ownerless fields, you have ownerless field with you have two ownerless fields, let's say, with a big fence in the middle. When you acquire one part of it, you do have to acquire the other part of it. And the carob tree and a sycamore tree have their own identity. They're like very, very important. They're of a lot of importance. They're almost like their own field. But says the Rajban, since there's no border here, there's no boundary separating it. So therefore, when you acquire one ownerless field, you acquire everything that's inside that ownerless field, including the sycamore tree and the carob tree. Okay. Now a case I don't think we've seen yet. You want to go and make your field holy. So you want to makdish, you want to sanctify your field. So says the Mishnah, hikdish askula. So you've sanctified everything in your field. Whatever's in your field is now sanctified. Why? So the Rashbam says it's like ba'ayin yafa. It's like giving a present. Before you give a present to your friend, now you're giving a present to the Beis HaMikdash. So it says Reb Shimon Omer hamakdish asada lo hikdish ella as a charuv hamurkav as sadan hashikma. So we'll explain why in the Gemara, but he only sanctifies the sycamore tree and the grafted carob tree. The other things,
Except for
no, here they are. They are sanctified.
oh wait, is this
Yeah.
He is not consecrated.
one consecrates of all? It's not
Rashbam says the avagav begabe mechir is asada ena mechurin. When you sell, they're not sold, but hacha muktashin. The second opinion, Rabbi Shimon.
or he must
Is not consecrated.
exclude
The field, but he's consecrated those trees, no?
No.
Rashbam doesn't say that. I don't know. Let's see why it says it.
Consecration includes
Right. No, lo hikdish here it says here. No. What it means is other independent entities that are not included in a sale do not get consecrated, like a pit or a birdhouse, except for the grafted carob tree and the cut sycamore. Those are consecrated. So Rabbi Shimon says, right, other things that are not included in a sale are not consecrated. But here it's the inverse of you. Usually we say those things are included and a sycamore tree is out. Here it's the opposite. Those things are not included, but a sycamore tree and a carob tree are in, and we have to explain why should that be true. Fine. Says the Gemara, Ma'ishna Machar, Ma'ishna Matana. What's the difference between a mecher, a sale, and what's the difference between a matana? By a mecher, it's ba'ayin ra, it's with a stingy eye, and by matana not. So the Gemara is saying that So the Rashbam explains sometimes, like, you don't always, give everything extra. Sometimes you also only give exactly what you said. So the same way by a sale, you only sell what you said. So sometimes by a gift, you also only give what you said. And yet there's so much more included in a sale, and there's so much more included in a gift, according to our Mishnah. Why is it so clear to the Mishnah that by a gift, all those things are included? A person, when he gives a gift, doesn't always give everything. Sometimes he just gives whatever he spoke out, right? Like who says when you want to give your car, you're also giving your motorcycle? I don't know. You should specify that. Okay, that's a bad example because the motorcycle is not inside the car. But the question is, not every time you give a gift, do you specify? Not every time you give a gift, do you mean to include much more than what your words mean? And yet by the Mishnah, it's so obvious that the Mishnah says if you're giving a gift, not only your field, but even the pit and the sycamore. Why is that true? So the Gemara says, Pirish Yudah ben Nekusa. Yudah ben Nekusa explained, Lifnei Rebbe, in front of Rebbe, Zeh Pirish was Eloi Pirish. By a sale, he spoke it out, but by a gift, he didn't speak it out. So says the Gemara, what? Hayizeh Pirish, V'zeloi Pirish. That's not true. Zeloi Pirish, V'zeloi Pirish. Our Mishnah is very clear. You didn't specify anything. In both cases, you said, I'm selling you a field and I'm giving you a field. And you did not specify anything more than a field. So you can't tell me that the difference is, oh yeah, by a field that you're selling. So there you just said a field. But by a gift, you specified more than that. That's not true. Our Mishnah just says you gifted a field or you sold a field. So now what's the difference between gifting a field and selling a field? Why by gifting a field do we include so much more, and by selling a field we don't? Ela zeh haya lo lefarish, v'zeh lo haya lo lefarish. So says the Gemara that since when you give a gift, you're used to giving generously, since generally gifts are given, and generally people include more in a gift, if in this case you didn't want to mean that, you should have specified. If usually when a person gives a gift, more is included in their words because they're giving a gift, they're being generous, we're not so stingy with his exact words. So if you're giving a field, we're going to look at your field and say, oh, he probably means the entire field and everything that comes along with it. So therefore, you should have specified, no, I'm giving a gift. My field is a gift, but not the pit, the birdhouse, the sycamore tree, the carob tree. So since you didn't speak that out, therefore it's sold, therefore it's gifted to the recipient. However, by a sale, we don't assume that whenever you're selling something, people are very, not necessarily stingy with their money, but they're very careful with their money. So when you sell something, we don't. If you're selling a field, we don't assume you're selling a field and whatever else is included in the field. No, because you're selling exactly what you set out to sell. Yeah. Fine. So that's the difference. A field needs to be a gift has to be spoken out, but a sale, but by a sale, since you don't usually just sell more, than what you're saying, so therefore you don't have to speak it out. Therefore, if you don't speak it out, so then it's not going to be sold with the field. Okay. Hahuda Amr Lahu. So one second. Yeah. So Hahuda Amr Lahu Habu Le Planya basis. So someone told, sounds like a group of people, maybe a bezdin. So he said, Habu Le Planya Besa. I want you to give to Ploni, to that person, a house that demakzik meya gulfi. This house, it's able to hold, it's so big it can hold 100 gulfi, 100 barrels. The Rashbam points out that it sounds like it's almost like 100 square feet, meaning it's 10 barrels it could hold lengthwise and 10 barrels widthwise. Those are the dimensions. So within the house, you're able to put 100 barrels. I guess 100 square barrels. So That's the house. Let's say the guy owns a bunch of houses, so now what happens? They go and they find a house that can hold 120 barrels worth. So he says, it actually holds more than 100. It holds 120. Now, if the guy had another property that can hold 100, so then there's nothing to talk about. The guy owns 10 properties, and he says, give that guy the property that owns 100, that can fit 100 barrels. You don't have a right to go and say, oh, but this one's 120, so let's give you that one. You can't do that. However, he doesn't have another property that can hold 100 barrels. They only found one that holds 120 barrels. And on that, so now what happens? Does the guy get that house or not? Well, 100 is pretty close to 120, so maybe he should get it. On the other hand, he didn't say 120. He said 100. So what happens? So Amar Zutra, Meya Amarle, Meya Ve'esrin, Lo Amarle, says he told him 100. So you could take the part of the house that can fit 100 barrels, but that's sixth part of the house. So let's say you divide the house that each part of the house can fit 20 barrels. That's what the Rashbam seems to learn. So 5 parts of the house you could take that fits 100 barrels. The sixth part that you don't get. But Rav Ashi Amar Milo Tanan, B'medvar Murim, B'mocher, Aval B'nosin, Matan Nosin Eskulan. Didn't our mission teach us that when you're giving a gift, you give it b'ayin yafa, with a generous eye, and therefore the whole house belongs to him. Maybe you'll say, well, if that's true, why did the guy say 100? Meaning, maybe the guy said 100 because he only wants to give you part of the house and not the whole house. So how do you have a right to go take the whole house? So that the Rashbam explains, he thought it held 100. He was wrong. I mean, he thought the property held 100. It actually can hold 120. Yeah. So therefore, machlokas comes out that do you apply this case of our Mishnah even to this case? And so that's a machlokas, Mar Zutra and Rav Ashi. Alma mandi yav matana b'ayin yav hakanami mandi yav matana b'ayin yav. Just like our Mishnah says, when you give a gift, you give it b'ayin yav. So too here, I said 100. Now, here it's more of a novelty, I think. Because in the Mishnah, you said a field. A field is vague. What's included in a field? So there, it sounds like everyone's going to agree to the Mishnah that when you're giving it, when you say field, everything's included in the field. Meaning these two opinions are Amarayim. They come later. They're not going to argue on the Mishnah. But when you specifically specify the dimensions of the house, and you say 100, and you happen to only own a property of 120, so to say there that you're giving with a generous eye is more of a novelty, because the guy said 100, he didn't say 120. So you can easily understand it to mean you only get 5/6 of my house. And yet he still says that what he really meant was the whole house. Okay, now we get to Hamakdish Esasada, one who's going to consecrate his field. So the Mishnah said if you consecrate your field, that's like giving it as a gift. And the first opinion said you actually get the whole thing. But Rabbi Shimon said the only parts of the field that get consecrated are not all the other extras, only the sycamore tree and the carob tree. Yeah, so let's see. Says the Gemara, Rav Huna Afal Gabdam Rabbanon, even though the Rabbanon say, Hakona Shnei Ilanos, V'sog Shal Chavero, Harezeh Lo Kanakarka. So says Rav Huna, even though the Rabbanon say that when you buy 2 fields within the property of your friend, so now the question comes up, do you acquire the property under the field or the property under the trees or only the trees itself? So say the Rabbanon that when you buy 2 trees, you only acquire the trees and you do not acquire the property under the trees, the field under the trees, the land, really the ground under the trees. Yeah. So basically, all you've acquired is the fruits from this tree, as long as the tree's alive. If that tree were to die, so you cannot replant trees there, because the ground does not belong to you. The ground remains with the buyer. So basically, what he basically sold you was the trees right now for the fruits of the tree. But the property itself, the ground, is not yours. If you would sell 3 trees, then you have acquired the land under it. That's considered like its own, its own little area, its own sada, and therefore you've acquired the ground under it. Okay. However, machar karka, let's say a person sells land, v'shayir shnei ilanos lefanav. So a guy sold land. However, v'shayir shnei ilanos lefanav, he retained for himself 2 trees. So I sell you my property, except for 2 trees. So now, those 2 trees, yesh lo karka. Yesh lo karka. When you retain for yourself 2 trees, you also retain the ground under the trees, not just the trees itself. One second. Yeah. Why? So now the Rabbanan hold, when you sell things, you sell ba'ayin ra, with a more stingy eye, right? So therefore, when you're selling trees, only 2 trees, you're not including the ground under it, because you're keeping more things for yourself, because that's you sell ba'ayin ra. But when you sell something and you keep 2 trees for yourself, so once again, you're keeping also the ground under it. So whatever you could keep whatever we could interpret that you would keep for yourself, you do keep for yourself until specified, because that's their opinion that you do ba'ayin ra. Fine. That's a statement of Rav Huna. Now the Rashbam points out that the Gemara is going to go and expand Rav Huna's statement, but it's going to get rejected later on. So now that's all the opinion of Rav Huna in the name of the Rabbanan, who say that you sell ba'ayin ra. Says the Gemara now. Says the Gemara, va'afilu l'Rebbe Akiva. Even Rabbi Akiva, the Amar Mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher, who generally is very generous, when you sell something, we can assume that you're including more into your sale because you sell with a generous eye. But he only says that honey mili gabi borvadus. When it comes, check me on this, the last line of the Amud. When it comes to selling a pit or a cistern full of, so that's Rabbi Akiva says that comes along with that is the pathway to get there. Why? The lo kamakshi ba'ara, that the ground area around the pit doesn't damage the pit at all. So therefore, for sure, that's sold with the pit. Yeah. So therefore, since the area around the pit is going to cause no damage to the pit, so there's no reason why we should assume that Rabbi Akiva would retain that area for himself. However, by trees, aval ilanos de kamachashi ba'ara, trees that the roots could ruin the ground, so that even Rabbi Akiva is going to agree that you retained the ground from under the trees for yourself. And you're allowed to then, if the trees were to die, you're allowed to go and replant your own trees. Right? So once again, you sold 2 trees to your friend, you keep the ground under it. That's the opinion of the Rabbanan. But now we're saying maybe even Rabbi Akiva will agree that the ground under the trees you will keep. You'll keep for yourself. Therefore, if those trees were ever to die, you would have the ability and you'd have the right to go and replant trees because it's your property. Now, why would we say that? Because im isa de lo shayir, if you didn't retain the ground for yourself, rather you gave the ground to the lokeach, to the buyer, le malay, akar in ilancha shkol vizil. The buyer is going to tell you that, once these trees have died, the buyer is going to say, you should go uproot your trees and plant me new ones. And so Steve has to explain it. So if you give the ground under the trees to the buyer, what's going to happen is after these trees died, he's going to tell you, to go uproot the trees and then plant me new ones. This way, if you retain the land for yourself, the guy can have no claim on you. Yeah, is that what it does?
The Bible tell him after the tree dies, uproot your tree and take it his land. As even Rabbi Akiva will agree that in this case, the seller is stingy and reserves the land and they're allowed to peace for himself.
Right, because if you would give the land, so what would the buyer tell you? After the trees have died,
So
and then what? And what would happen?
the land stays with buyer.
The land stays with the buyer. So therefore, so like this. When a person sells land that has trees on it, they want to have the ability to replant their trees. They don't want, that's it. Once the trees die, I lost the ability to replant it. So therefore, even Rabbi Akiva, who generally sells with a generous eye, but maybe he'll agree, we're suggesting now that maybe he'll agree that no, you always want the right to the ground under the trees, so that after these trees die, right? So then, so that you want to retain that land so you can replant trees and then sell them. Because since trees are going to cause damage to the ground, it can be very possible that the trees are going to die. So therefore, you're going to sell, when you sell the trees, you'll retain the rights to yourself to replant them afterwards. If you give it to the buyer's going to say, he'll just say goodbye. You go uproot these trees and go plant new ones, but it's going to remain the buyer's property. And if he doesn't want to deal with it, so no one's going to deal with it, and then it's going to go to waste. So that's why even Rabbi Akiva will agree that when it comes to a sale, even though in general you sell b'ayin yafa, but in this case you're going to sell and keep the ground for yourself.
And you get the right of ways.
Up the trees, right? What is that?
You have the right of way also to get to the tree and everything included.
Well, remember, in this case, you're only selling 2 trees.
Right.
So everything else is yours. So you own 2 trees across the street.
Okay.
So those 2 trees you sell. Now, yes, the buyer's going to have a way to get there.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, I would assume so, because or else he can't.
So that's just assumed.
Correct. Yeah. Good question. Okay. So now on this extension of Rabbi Akiva, that he's going to make an exception to his general rule of ayin yafa. This we're going to ask on. Tanan. Rabbi Shimon says, "Hamakdish as asada lo hikdish ella charav amurkav as dana shikma." When you sanctify a field, you've only sanctified the charav hamurkav and the sadana shikma, the grafted carob tree and the sycamore tree. Why? V'tani Allah, we taught and explained this opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Amr Rabbi Shimon matam. Why did I say this? Ho'il ve yunakin mi stay hektish. So there's a general rule that when you sanctify something, I believe this might be a debate somewhere else, but at least for now, things that grow from there are also hektish, right? So when you, in this case, since the trees are getting sustenance from the field, and the field you sanctified, so too the carob tree you have also sanctified. This probably explains why the reservoir of water and the birdhouse are not sanctified. Right? We said that Rabbi Shimon says they're not sanctified. Why? They're not getting sustenance from the field. They're just a hole in the ground with water. But since the trees do, according to this, it would seem to be any really trees, not only the sycamore tree. Trees get sustenance from the ground. The ground is kadosh. Since the ground is kadosh, so therefore these trees, they get sustenance from there. They're also kadosh. So now, if that's true, how is this going to fit with Rabbi Akiva that we just said? If you're going to tell me shiyurei shayir, that when you sell trees, when you sell these 2 trees, you you retain the land from under the trees, then hold on. Who are these trees being sustained from? So if you retain the land from under the trees for yourself, then ki kayanki midinafshe kayanki, right? Rabbi Shimon's whole premise is based off the fact that when you sanctify a field, you sanctified the whole field, and now whatever is getting sustenance from there is going to be holy. However, in the event that you retained property for yourself, so then the trees are only being sustained from the non-hektish part, the part that's not, that has not been sanctified. One second. One second. Yeah, so just remember that Rav Huna had two statements. One statement was when you sell two trees, you retain the land under it. But his other statement was when you sell land and you retain two trees for yourself, you also retain the land under it. So that second case is similar to over here. Usually when you sell things, you retain the sycamore tree for yourself, right? So when you sell a field and you retain two trees for yourself, you get the land under the trees too. So too here, what should come out is when you sell a field, but what's not included are the sycamore trees, you should also retain the land under the sycamore trees. That should remain yours. So meaning that the land under the sycamore trees, they'll come together. So when you sanctify a field, if you don't sanctify the sycamore trees, so then even the field under them shouldn't be sanctified because they go together. And yet we see here that according to Rabbi Shimon, he says the reason why the sycamore trees are sanctified is because of the land that's under it. But if in general, when you sell a field and you exclude two trees, you're also excluding the ground under the trees. So then in this case, when generally sycamore trees are sold, when field is sold, the sycamore trees are not included, the ground under them should also be not included. And if that should be true, then when you would sanctify a field, you should sanctify everything except for the sycamore trees and the ground under it. So what does Rabbi Shimon mean? That when you sanctify something, all of a sudden, the ground under it is also going, it sounds like they're only sanctified because they get sustenance from the ground under it. So then, ki kayanki, that's midenafshi kayanki. They're not included in the general, that ground you kept for yourself. And yet we see not that way. So that's a question on what we just said. So we first suggest like this, you're right. Rabbi Shimon is the Amar Rabbi Akiva. That Rabbi Shimon that says that when you sanctify a field and the sycamore trees are sanctified, and the field comes with the sycamore trees, so that's like the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who holds the ayin yafahu mocher, and therefore even the ground under, will be sold. The problem is that's no longer like Rav Huna. Rav Huna said that you would keep the ground for yourself. So the Gemara says you're right. Rav Huna the Amar kirabanan. Rav Huna, who says that you retain the ground with the trees, that's because he holds that when you sell things, you sell it more stingy, and therefore the ground is retained. Yeah. Okay, maybe we will start from this machlokas tomorrow, because the next is one big section coming up. So maybe we'll start with reviewing this Reb Shimon's opinion and Rav Huna, and we'll finish the last two lines, and then we'll continue on the next daf, and hopefully we'll finish the parak Bez Hashem tomorrow, and then starting Friday.